Media mix models are powerful observational models. This means they're subject to overfitting and can easily lead to correlation versus causation confusion. Out-of-sample predictive accuracy checks means checking how well a model can predict the KPI of interest on data that it hasn't seen before. This check is a critical step in identifying problems with your model. And while this check can't prove that a model has identified the true underlying causal structure in a dataset, this check can provide evidence for or against that claim. Out-of-sample accuracy checks are also one of the best ways to validate a model and then start building trust in its forecasting ability. In this video, we're going to explain what out-of-sample predictive accuracy checks are, why they're so important for media mix modeling, and how to really run them properly. I'm Michael Kaminsky, statistician, marketing scientist, and co-founder of Recast. I'm here to show you the secrets and science behind building complex, reliable models in the context of the media mix models that are actually built on top of Recast. This is how to build a media mix model that won't destroy your marketing program, presented by Recast, Episode 6. Broadly, our goal is to define a model building process that produces robust, statistically rigorous media mix models. So far, we've discussed how to select and configure an initial model, how to run parameter recovery checks on that model, and how to test for its stability and robustness. The last step in our model building process is to check the out-of-sample predictive accuracy of the model itself. Before we get started, we have to recognize that in the context of media mix modeling, we can't use the same off-the-shelf cross-validation tools that you might be familiar with from a machine learning context. The reason why is because in the world of marketing, everything is highly time dependent. So individual observations, like days or weeks, aren't actually independent from each other. If I have the data on what happened on Tuesday and Thursday, it's not actually very difficult to predict what must have happened in between those days on Wednesday. So when validating media mix models, it's critical that we're holding out a full time series of data in the future with respect to the data cutoff date. This sounds complicated, but the idea is actually pretty simple. We want to chop off the last n days of data, say the last 30, 60, or 90 days, and then train the full model up to that point. Then we ask the model to predict what will happen in the data that it hasn't seen before. We then compare the model's estimates of predictions with the actuals over that time period to see the model's out-of-sample predictive accuracy. This is an extremely important check in the model building process, but it can be a little difficult to get right because you need to be careful to make sure that there isn't data leakage between the model training data set and the model outcome data set. This can be more subtle than you might expect. For example, if you are training your model on the full data set to generate an estimate of seasonality, and then you use that in the model, well then you haven't really done the full holdout check because you estimated the seasonality on the full data set and then you use that in the model training process, and so there was data leakage or information leakage between the training process and the validation check. And so when you're doing these checks, it's really important to make sure that you design the process to avoid any information leakage between the training process and the validation step. If the model fails to capture major trends in future data, it probably doesn't have a good read on what was actually driving past performance. In practice, you should run and review many out-of-sample predictive accuracy checks of differing lengths of time to build confidence in a model's forecasting ability. And if you update your model frequently, you can automate these checks with each model refresh. And that's exactly how we do things at Recast. When Recast models update every week, a new series of out-of-sample predictive accuracy checks are triggered on a brand's backlog of old and pre-trained models. This creates an out-of-sample forecast accuracy report card that looks something like this. So here we see for the 7-day-old Recast model, the platform runs a brand's actual spend data through the model and has it make a forecast. It then compares the model's forecasted outcome to the known outcome over the last 7 days and reports on that model's forecast error. And then we repeat this same process for models that are 30, 60, and 90 days old to assemble the full out-of-sample accuracy scorecard. Automated checks like this are important for a few reasons. If forecasts are off, this can signal issues in the underlying model structure and the need to make changes to a model's configuration. If forecasts are consistently strong, this can give a brand confidence that their models have identified true causal signal and can be trusted for decision making. One of the most common mistakes we see is when a brand or modeler just inherently trusts the output of a media mix model. We think you should do exactly the opposite. You should be skeptical of any model by default and use a process of ongoing validation to build trust in the model over time. Out-of-sample predictive accuracy checks and lift tests are critical in this validation process. As we wrap up this series, it's important to remember that running data through a media mix model and getting something out on the other side, that's the easy part. The hard part is really doing it correctly, following a rigorous model building process, holding your model to high performance standards so that when you actually use it to make decisions, you don't ruin your marketing program. But if you do this whole process, you'll be rewarded with a robust, accurate model that your marketing team can actually trust.